Oh no, the card is broken and it's stuck in this adapter. There it is. Oh no, how can this happen? We've got 110 amps outside. Beautiful! And look at this cloudy weather we have. Gives me free 100 amps. Guys, welcome back to the Off-Grid Garage here in sunny, hot Australia. Yeah, as you have seen, we've got a bit of a problem here. Basically, yesterday afternoon, the Victron Venus OS in the Raspberry Pi stopped working. And when it got dark, it still showed 800 watts of solar coming in from the tilt system. And I said, well, it cannot be true, right? It's almost dark. Would be nice, but it's not true. And this power is measured by a Shelly 1 PM. So I got a bit suspicious. I logged into the Raspberry Pi and it was very laggy and unresponsive, you know? So what do you do in these circumstances? Restart. And the Raspberry Pi never came back. So eventually I pulled out the power cable of the Raspberry Pi and gave it a hard reset, plugged it back in, could see the power light coming on, but no green light for the SD card access. So it didn't read any data from the SD card anymore. Tried a couple of times, no success. So eventually I took the whole Raspberry Pi out of the battery shelf, took it apart, took off the can head as well, yeah, and tried here on the workbench with no luck. I've removed the SD card then and could see it is a bit bended at the end. May have gone a bit hot or something inside with the Raspberry Pi sitting in this, well, it's sitting in the little card reader behind the Raspberry Pi for years basically now. And it may have gotten a bit hot or something, so the plastic has a bit deformed. But then when I pulled it out, I could only pull out the end of the SD card. When I got in there with a little screwdriver and was able to push out the other part of the SD card. Yeah, and then I put it in this SD card reader here because I wanted to check if it still works. But it isn't. So really the SD card has broken in two pieces. And this was a good PNY, whatever brand it is. And you may remember from a past video, we had this exact issue before. The SD card just stopped working and everything was gone. So I had to restart from scratch, building up this Raspberry Pi with Venus OS and all the settings. Yeah, it was a bit of an effort, right? And it seems like this same shit happens again now. And there's no way to back up this SD card automatically in the Raspberry Pi. There's no function in Venus OS to do that actually. So anyway, I took one of my many 64 gig SD cards here, flashed it with the newest version of the Venus OS, put it back in the Raspberry Pi, and still nothing. So I thought, well, Raspberry Pi is gone as well. Luckily, I had a second Raspberry Pi here, brand new. It's a version 4. So I hooked this one up here with the same SD card with Venus OS on it. Same, nothing. Doesn't boot. Shit, what is going on here? It's a brand new Raspberry Pi, it doesn't boot. So I downloaded Raspberry OS, whatever it's called, put this on the SD card, put it in each of the Raspberry Pis, and none of them would actually start up. And the Raspberry Pi had actually both lights constantly on, the red light and the green light. And I had a very quick Google search about this, and some people said there could be a bootloader failure in one of the EEPROMs on the Raspberry Pi, and I need to do this and this and this to flash it and whatever. And I really didn't have any interest in doing this last night. Because when I got here in the garage, it was already 11:15 or so in the night. It's another late night show. So none of these Raspberry Pis were actually working anymore. I was without Venus OS. Luckily, the system was still working. Well, and then the next step was to remove the Cerbo GX here and use this one as my main Venus OS device. And Victron makes it actually very easy to swap one device from an installation to another installation. This all can be done in the VRM under Settings and General. And it is basically a two-step process. You either need to add a new GX device if your old one is broken, like my one, or you can transfer one from an existing installation to your own installation. And this is point number 2, what I have done as well. So I basically selected the S.P.A.T Calibration Centre, the Cerbo GX, and want this to replace the off-grid garage, the generic Venus OS device, the Raspberry Pi. So basically the Cerbo GX will then start updating your existing installation in the Victron VRM. You will then get this warning here where it explains that your new GX device will then replace your existing one. You need to confirm this and off you go. You get the confirmation and have to restart your GX device. What I did. Yeah, and we have now the Cerbo GX living in the battery shelf here. The cabling looks a bit wild. But it was like after 12 o'clock last night when I did all this here, because it needs a 12-volt power supply. So I had to connect it here to the fuse holder, and I just left it sitting in here to see if everything works. Which it does. It's a plug-and-play system. I plugged in my 4-port UR2 USB-C controller again, started flashing, communicating with all the MPPTs. Connected the smart shunt via VE direct cable, and also plugged in the multi-plus directly via VE bus now. Yeah, this was not possible with the Raspberry Pi before, and we had to use this overpriced MK3 adapter. It's a VE bus to USB adapter. $100. And this basically connects your multi-plus via VE bus to a USB port and to the Raspberry Pi. So with the Cerbo now installed, we don't need this anymore, right? And then it took me another 45 minutes, an hour or so last night to get everything back and organized again, because now devices started to show up twice. They still showed up with the old instance as well as with the new one. It's basically like an ID the Venus OS gives to all the devices. So I had to remove all the old devices manually. I also had to install the script again, which talks to the Shelly 1 PM for the tilt system. And then at around 1 AM in the morning, when everything was up and running again, I can show you quickly here in the Victron VRM. We are in the off-grid garage. We've got the tilt system up and running. We've got our AC load. We've got the Aura charger, the EV charger connected. DC MPPT controllers are showing all up. Smart shunt is showing up. Multi-plus down here, connected via VE bus. Perfect. Then I was wondering if I need to insert an SD card into the Cerbo GX actually, because it has an SD card slot. And in the S.P.A.T Calibration Centre I never put one in. So I did some quick research to see if it's actually necessary to do that and what it is for. Well, it turns out the SD card in the Cerbo GX is mainly for offline installation of new firmware updates. Now you can put the SWU file onto this SD card, restart the Cerbo GX, and then it updates automatically from this file on the SD card. It also uses the SD card to store information and data if the Cerbo GX is offline. And then once it's online again, it transmits all this information from the SD card back to the Victron VRM online. So you don't lose any data even if you have no internet for a couple of weeks. But this function works also without any SD card. And because I'm permanently connected to the internet here, I don't really need this SD card, so I didn't put one in. But what I also found was that the size of this SD card is limited to 32 gig. And for some reason, it also crossed my mind that there is an SD card limit for the Raspberry Pi. And I quickly looked it up, and sure it is 32 gig. Maximum SD card support for these devices. So, and potentially my mistake was to use a 64 gigabyte SD card where I flashed the Venus OS on and also the Raspberry Pi OS for testing these Raspberry Pis. And obviously they cannot read this 64 gig SD card anymore. So, short story long, I have a 32 gig SD card of one of my cameras here. And I will try to flash this one again with the newest Venus OS version and then pop this into the Raspberry Pi, which was in the battery shelf, and see if it boots up. It seems like the Cerbo GX runs actually a bit more reliable than the Raspberry Pi. Not from a pure hardware perspective, but this SD card is obviously a point of failure because it happened to me twice now. And to actually do a backup of this SD card, you have to stop your Raspberry Pi, take out the SD card, put it into your computer, use a special program to do a one-to-one copy into an image file, and then put everything back into the Raspberry Pi. That is a pain in the ass. Who is doing that? That is just not practical. And how often do you do that? You know, once a month, once a year or something then? And if you have such a backup, it's months old. And obviously the Cerbo GX has an internal memory, so this problem actually doesn't occur. Okay, so let's use the Win32 disk imager. We click on it. That is the SWU file you want to use. Takes only a few seconds. Successful. Exit. Okay, let's see if this fires. Back into the Raspberry Pi 3. Plug the USB into my power bank. And let's see if we get a green light. There's a red light. There's still no green light. Oh, come on. Okay, I just flashed the SD card with RaspiOS again, just to see if it actually works. We should see a green light, right? It says power and activity, but there's no activity light anymore. Oh, come on, Raspi. Okay, let's plug it in. Nah, there's no activity light. Yeah, and the Raspberry Pi 4 has a green light, but it's permanently on. Red and green, static lights as soon as I turn it on. Brand new device, not sure what's going on. Some people in the forum said they had to get it replaced because it was faulty. Oh god, really? There's no activity. There's also no activity here on the network, nothing. So I've tried now different power supplies as well, but there's only a red light, no green light, no activity on the SD card reader at all with the Raspberry Pi 3. So maybe this is just gone after 3 years in this battery shelf. It is just not working anymore for whatever reason. So I can't get this one to work, and I can't get the new one to work either because of the two lights which are permanently on. So I'm totally stuck now. Well, not quite. We still have this Cerbo GX installed and it is up and running. Yeah, with all these options here for VE Direct connections, I will remove the VE Direct to USB adapter here going to the Raspberry Pi. There's a whole bunch of cable lining up here as well. So we just unplug this one. And I'm using this VE Direct to VE Direct cable. This is a 1 meter cable and it is just long enough to reach. Alright, this is as good as it gets at the moment. So I cleaned up all the cables. I left the power cable as long as it is for the Cerbo GX because I'm not sure if it goes back to the Powerwall 2.0. You know, it's one of these permanent temporary fixes, I think. I have to clean out all the old Raspberry Pi parts. So the S.P.A.T Calibration Centre is still online in the Victron VRM. Obviously there is no data coming in anymore. It's trying to connect, but it says 12 hours offline. Yeah, it is now 11:40. This is exactly 12 hours ago when I took the Cerbo GX off the Powerwall 2.0, the S.P.A.T Calibration Centre, and put it in the battery shelf. If we have a look in the device list, we can still see the gateway. But if we have a look in here, it tells you the VRM portal ID and say used as replacement at, then there's a number behind it. I don't know what this number means. So it still knows the Cerbo GX, but it says it's a replacement now. So it's no longer reporting data to this VRM, it's reporting all the data to the new VRM. And this VRM portal ID is exactly the same as we can see here in the off-grid garage now. See there? That's the same portal ID number. And obviously I've changed the IP address to match the old Raspberry Pi, because then everything reconnected to the Cerbo GX now, the Home Assistant, the electric vehicle charger, they're all bound to this IP address. But oh boy, in Home Assistant it's a total mess now. Some of the entities are not working anymore correctly because, well, the device ID has changed in the Victron system for the Smart Shunt, for example, yeah? And it doesn't show us the voltage anymore. The same for the temperature sensors. So I have to repair all this here as well. Well, and I guess there's not much you can do if you run a Raspberry Pi with an SD card. I mean, if you do that, how often do you take a backup of your SD card then and store it somewhere else just in case this happens and the SD card fails and your Raspi dies? I've seen there's a project on GitHub actually to have a restore and backup function in the Venus OS, but this is an uncontinued project and hasn't been touched since 2021 or so. So actually nothing we can use at the moment, unfortunately. And interestingly, even Victron was involved in this project, but it didn't continue for some reason. Well, but we need to get something done. We need to have some GX device here in the Powerwall 2.0 for all our testing. And I either have to buy another Cerbo GX, or I would rather repair the Raspberry Pi again and then swap it out with the Cerbo GX here on the battery shelf now. So hopefully it is just a temporary fix. But let me know in the comments down below how I can proceed with repairing this Raspberry Pi and what else can I try? I don't know. But guys, lesson learned from all this again. I am actually lucky I don't have the PIDA boards or any other CAN BMS connected to the Raspberry Pi, because without BMS communication to the inverter, the whole system would have shut down last night. Yeah? And as you know, I'm not using any communication to the BMSs at the moment. I use the PIDA boards only for monitoring purposes in Home Assistant. And the 4 MPPT solar charge controllers are using a Victron smart network, a Bluetooth network, in combination with the smart shunt as well. And this is obviously independent of any other hardware. So even without a Cerbo GX or a Raspberry Pi or any other control and monitoring system in here, the system would have kept working. As long as we are not under the shut-off voltage of the inverter, everything keeps running and even charging during the day. So the GX device, either the Cerbo or the Raspberry Pi with the Venus OS running, is only a nice to have feature. It is not a necessity to keep your system running, thankfully. But again, with communication established, everything would have shut down. And with all these batteries I have here and getting them connected at some stage, I'm really leaning more and more to a system without communication actually. As long as each of these batteries have their own BMS correctly set up and protecting each of the batteries. From a pure safety perspective, there's nothing different if we have communication established or not. All the batteries are still protected by their own individual BMS. Obviously, there's no communication to your system or to your mobile phone or Home Assistant or something if there is one of the BMSs failing for whatever reason, over voltage, over temperature, over current, whatever. You don't get a notification as such. But of course, we can use the Batmon integration in Home Assistant and use Bluetooth to connect to most of these BMSs here. And if you haven't seen it already, there's also a solution now to connect your Pace BMS to Home Assistant. This is described in all details on the Global Power website. I'll link this down below if you're interested. It needs a bit of additional hardware to make this work, because the Pace BMS has no Bluetooth. But it seems like they're getting most of the data actually into Home Assistant then and can control and monitor the Pace BMS as well. Pretty cool. And honestly, with the current work attitude from JK, for example, towards their version 14 and version 15 users of their inverter BMS, the brand new inverter BMS, I'm not so confident that they will ever get this all right and it works with most of the inverters out there. You know, just read the comments under my videos where people still finding new bugs and complain about the JK inverter BMS is not working with their specific inverter correctly. And people still sending me emails that they have found new bugs. So please, guys, do not send me emails. Send them to JK. Here, this is the address you should send all your complaints to, not me. And I'm not in a position here to test any other inverters than the Victron system at the moment. I cannot test the Growbot or the D or the Sofa or whatever it's out there just to confirm what you have found. So send this all to JK directly. And they have already sent me their newest version of the JK BMS, so it should be here in a couple of days. And we will have a very detailed look at this BMS then, but it is a new hardware again, you know? And they're claiming this is very accurate with the state of charge calculation, plus minus 3% of error only. And it will have some other nice features. But what about your existing customers, you know, version 14, version 15? And they told me it will be fixed this month. Well, the month has just started. So it could be another 30 days or so until we see a new firmware for the version 15 at least. If they do one as well for version 14, I don't know. I have pushed them towards it because I have a lot of version 14 BMSs here myself. And I would like to see the version 14 and the version 15 working together if you use communication at all. So that's why I'm saying I'm leaning towards not using any communication with these BMSs anymore. So let the Cerbo BMS be in these batteries, or a Pace BMS, or a JK BMS, or a Tanga, whatever it's called, Tanjangbangda BMS. As long as the BMS protects your individual single battery, I don't really care too much about communication. As we have seen last night, without communication, the system just keeps running. So yeah, as much as I can see the advantages of having communication between your battery, BMS, and your inverter or the Victron system, I can also see a lot of disadvantages. Well, this was my late afternoon, evening and night yesterday and the early morning today again to make this all working again and also try a different SD card in these Raspberry Pis. But still I cannot get this to work for some reason. And I'm really keen to read your comments what else I could try to get the Raspberry Pi up and running again. Maybe it is faulty, maybe the SD card was just a result of that and the actual fault is with the Raspberry Pi. I don't know. It seems unresponsive, red light only, no green light, and the other Raspberry Pi 4, the brand new device, has 2 solid lights on, no booting, no flickering, no flashing, nothing either. So I'm not sure what's going on. Alright my friends, as always, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for all your amazing support. Welcome to all the new subscribers. We are over 96,000 subscribers now. We are very close to 100,000. I cannot thank you enough for everything you are doing here. I just released a members only video for people who are donating on a regular basis, keeping the channel running here. Thank you very, very much for everything you are doing. Without you, this channel wouldn't exist and there would be no videos here. Would be a shame, right? I would be tinkering in my garage here just for myself. But with your support, I'm able to share all this information now here on the channel. So I'm very, very grateful for that. Guys, until the next video, when we build... Until this next video then, you stay charged, stay safe, and thanks again for watching. See you then. Bye bye.